Take a look at what happened.
As time passes, you see more stuff come out. So there's people on the ground yelling about it.
Right there, see him? He's laying down, see him?
Yeah, he's laying down.
I just don't believe that that kid got his gun, climbed up on Ruth, and it was all on his own.
9 minutes beforehand, the snipers are notified, and they still don't tell anyone.
This local sniper saw the would-be shooter an hour and a half before the rally started, texted the concerns about the shooter.
Because they're not answering these questions, the internet's going haywire.
On the roof over here is a total distraction. This is what they wanted you to see.
A lot of people out there saying that there was a second shooter. The FBI haven't released their report. Why aren't the reports coming out?
That's an excellent question, and I'm probably the right person to ask.
Now more than ever, the truth is unclear. What's real, what's fake, and who's manipulating the narratives that have us questioning our facts. Wherever the story takes us, we will follow it. However outrageous it seems, we will investigate it. And whatever the truth is, we will find it. I'm Shane Smith, and I have questions. So just to get to the facts, September 15th, there was a second assassination attempt at the Trump International Golf Club in West Palm Beach.
In the bushes where this guy was is an AK-47 style rifle with a scope.
Gunman was first seen by the Secret Service agent sweeping the course. Trump was about 300 to 500 yards away. The suspect didn't fire his AK, but dropped the rifle and fled.
Driver! Walk straight back!
The suspect is identified as Ryan Wesley Ruth.
Ryan Wesley Ruth spent time as a volunteer in Ukraine after the Russian invasion.
There's been all kinds of conspiracy theories out there. Social media is filled with wild conspiracies from both sides of the political spectrum, with the right believing it's an inside job by our own government, and the left claiming that the shooting was staged by Trump's own campaign.
What internet experts are trying to claim is that it was an inside job, it was staged, and that the shooter very intentionally only hit him in the ear to, boost his ratings and such.
Claims that were apparently disproved by our ballistics expert and YouTube content creator, Brandon Herrera. All right, we're very, very happy to have Brandon Herrera here with us today. You ran for Congress recently. You just narrowly lost. I wanted to talk to you today because I saw your insanely incredible footage doing a ballistics recreation of the Trump assassination attempt. I wasn't the only one who found it interesting. 7 or 8 million views. So let's talk about that. There's people on both sides saying that the assassination attempt was staged. One side saying it was a deep state, there were more shooters, there's no way that this level of ineptitude could have happened. And then other people saying the immaculate ear.
Looks like the former president has lost a piece of his ear.
Yes, that is correct. As far as on the right side, if you zoomed in, the top piece.
It was Iwo Jima level imagery. And by the way, he wears, something on his ear for 3 days, and then he's fine.
Pretty much recovered, yeah. I'm a fast healer.
So that's why I loved your footage, because I'm like an armchair sniper myself. So, I'm like 5.56 high velocity weapon. There's no way it's going to just touch your ear and your ear's fine. And so that's why it was so great to be disproved by your footage.
Firing. Oh yeah, that was the fucking money shot right there.
We were able to show on a ballistic dummy that the round going through the ear looks crazy in 100,000 frames per second. We hear a lot of people parroting that 5.56, like a high velocity round like that, would have blown the ear completely off, or it would have, taken his head with it, and saying it had to be a piece of flying glass or shrapnel. For one, there's a photo of the bullet in flight, which is an incredible picture, by the way. It's a really hard thing to grasp. It's a great camera.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is when I saw your ballistics footage, you shoot it twice and there's like one little nick out. When you see it, the second shot, it does balloon out. Would it have sort of a minimal amount of damage that Trump showed after the attempt?
Yeah, so what we would call that is the difference between what's called permanent cavity and temporary cavity. Now, permanent cavity is like the actual path of the bullet itself, the projectile going through, and the hole that is cut by the projectile, whereas temporary cavity is that temporary expansion from the delivering of energy. And a lot of times that can be what's extremely fatal, especially if you're talking about, like a center mass shot or something like that. It's not necessarily the 22 caliber hole being drilled, but it's the expansion and the pressure being released. But showing that, a 5.56 round can hit through the top of the ear and slide through it and, not show massive damage, but while still very really being shot.
What's your reaction to people who say it was staged?
Starting on what wasn't true, a lot of people immediately were circulating that it was staged. The guy intentionally, shot his ear just to, boost Trump's ratings or whatever it was. And that's one of the things that we were trying to disprove is with the equipment that was used, that is an impossible shot. It is theoretically possible to have made, but it is impossible to, within the margin of error, hit the ear without a much more likely scenario of a complete miss or a fatal headshot. So if it was something that was done entirely as a publicity kind of move, with the equipment used, you're talking about a 1 in 50 chance if you pull that trigger, what happened.
There's a lot of people out there saying that there was a second shooter, even people within Trump's camp. What do you have to say to that?
I think that anytime something like this happens, there are always theories. And now there's all sorts of stuff about a guy being on a water tower and things like that. I have not seen sufficient evidence for me to think that that is what happened.
Right there, see him? He's laying down, see him?
Yeah, he's laying down.
As time passes, you see more stuff come out. So there's people on the ground yelling about it.
Yeah, look, there he is. Officer!
They had Secret Service, they had local police, they had all kinds of people there, FBI. I just don't believe that kid wandered over, got his gun, climbed up on the roof, snuck around a little bit and took some shots. And it was all on his own. I just don't buy it.
So we're talking to Dallas Alexander, who's a retired sniper, and his unit was responsible in Mosul for the longest confirmed kill, 3.5 kilometers. And you've worked on teams in charge of security for prime ministers in foreign countries, etc. And you're the highest grade sniper in the Canadian military. Is that true? Is that all correct?
Yes, retired now though.
Retired now, got it. How long were you a sniper for?
I was in the military just under 17 years. I was a sniper for probably 16 of it.
So you know what you're talking about. So obviously there's a lot of questions. We're talking to a lot of people about what happened for the attempted assassination of Trump. Let's just jump into it. What do you think happened?
I don't think the guy that apparently took the shots from the 5.56 assault rifle from the roof, I don't think he did it on his own. To me, having done this a long time, both the sniping side of things, but also VIP protection and close protection and planning stuff for up to and including our prime minister here in Canada when he would visit places overseas. It's just the two most obvious spots that I saw as soon as I saw, the aerial footage of that venue was that roof that he was at, which was maybe 100 yards.
Federal investigators have been up on the roof of the building complex where 20-year-old Thomas Crooks got access to a clear line of sight at the former president.
And then a water tower that was also within the same picture.
Once you look at this water tower in a 3D mode, there is no better shot to take than being on this water tower.
It's just too obvious to me, in my opinion, having that many tactical professionals, whether the level of competency varies, but they had Secret Service, they had local police, they had all kinds of people there, FBI. And to have it just deemed, we just overlooked that concern, I just don't buy it. So whether it was someone turning a blind eye or a bigger plan in general to have something crazier happen.
The official story is that basically the Secret Service and local police, it was just they fell down. It was a failure on their part. And so you're saying, in your professional opinion, you don't believe that that's true, that he had to have some help somewhere?
Yeah, so just tactically speaking, like that roof would have been deemed priority number one. It doesn't even take a professional. Like you could put a child out there that plays Call of Duty and they'd be like, yeah, you have to watch that building right there. I think there was help from someone that knew what was going on.
How? How would they help them, for example?
Oh, there could have been a million ways, depending on how far down an assumption rabbit hole you want to go. From, just it could be as simple as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 people just turning a blind eye to his approach, or somebody guiding him to that place. To me, the whole thing makes no sense. And I actually think the more these people talk, the more suspicious it seems.
I know that there's been allegations that that I personally cut, or that I that I denied requests. The Counter-Surveillance Division has been out there supporting the former president's detail.
This morning, NBC News has confirmed reporting that the Secret Service denied earlier requests for more security resources from Trump's security detail over the past 2 years.
This is something that's important. If you do the breakdown of who was there that day, I would like to know what the percentage of Secret Service were there, what the percentage of Homeland Security investigations was there, and what percentage was local and state assets. Because when you're not working together and you're diversified like that, there are going to be problems.
All right, Frank Loveridge, we want to thank you for being on the show today. 22-year veteran of the U.S. Secret Service, special agent in charge of Forensic Services Division, crime scene investigations, among others. Your presidential protection was, I'm going to say, bipartisan, both George W. Bush and Barack Obama. You're an expert on all matters Secret Service, and I want to start with a quote. It says, "We, the Secret Service, win before we go to war." What does that mean?
So I can't take credit for that. Sun Tzu said that in The Art of War.
Okay, good.
That's correct. But
You
what was said
paraphrased
was that victorious warriors win first before they go to war. But defeated warriors go to war and seek to win. What that means is we win by doing an advance. And if we fail in that advance, or we fail to execute that advance, we become defeated warriors.
So let's build that out. The advanced teams go out and they do a lot of work, and I think that people don't understand exactly how much work there is there. So
there is.
Like what type of advanced work do you do?
There's an agent assigned to every single site, and that agent has a counterpart from the local field office. And they go out and they put together a protective plan for the site they're responsible for. At that site, you're going to have Special Operations Division. Those are the tactical teams, such as your counter-assault, your counter-surveillance units, your protective intelligence division, and of course, the counter-snipers, to make sure that anything that is in play is taken out of play.
Now that's what's supposed to happen.
That's what's supposed to happen.
And so that brings me a lot of follow-up questions. It just seems like there's so many things that fell down from what you just outlined as, 90% of our work is advanced. Well, it doesn't seem like a lot of that work was done.
SWAT team members who were assigned to take up positions in defense of former President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, and they told us they had no communication with the Secret Service until after the gunfire started.
The local SWAT team snipers never even met the Secret Service snipers.
We were supposed to get a face-to-face briefing with the Secret Service snipers whenever they arrived, and that never happened.
Well, Shane, I got to tell you, the first problem they had was they had 2 command posts.
Yeah, why?
That should never happen. I've never seen that before.
Right.
In 23 years. You had 2 separate command posts, one with Secret Service and some police officers, and then another one with other local assets. There should have been one security room in which everybody was represented in that room, because our network is encrypted. It's also a closed network. So we're not hearing a tactical team saying there's a man on the roof with a gun. There's no way that the detail leader that was with President Trump, former President Trump, got any information that there was a threat on that roof or that there was a man with a gun. I don't think we had the tactical assets or the detection and mitigation teams in place.
Were security requests denied in the lead up to this? Is it sort of a disingenuous at best response when they said no security was ever denied? Then they added later for Butler. But the interesting thing we have learned is, yes, it was denied.
So I'm going to start with my friend Keith Schiller, we're very lucky to have, because you haven't really talked to anybody.
No.
So this is a special occasion.
It sure is.
Keith Schiller, New York Police Department, NYPD. And then after that, Donald Trump's personal bodyguard and head of security. And then you were director of Oval Office Operations. And the letter that was delivered to fire the head of the FBI, Comey, was delivered by?
That would be me.
You.
That would be me.
So let's get into it. Now, Trump, he gets a lot of threats.
Well, I'll give you a good example, Shane. You know, back at the, I guess there were 16, 17 other candidates back there in 2016.
This is a tough business to run for president.
I know you're a tough guy, Jeb.
And we need to have a leader that is
real
principled.
tough.
You're never going to be president of the United States by insulting your way to the presidency.
I'm at 40.
During the debates, he was averaging around 99 to 100 death threats per hour.
Wow.
So
like emails, texts,
calls, everything.
Calls.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're getting 100 an hour, I can only imagine what it turned into be over time.
So as he gets into politics, obviously, you know, stuff gets more serious.
Right.
These threats get more serious, but you stay in the gig.
Right.
So how does your gig change from, let's say, when he's a celebrity?
Right.
We were talking about The Apprentice, and, you know, it's
right.
the biggest show in America. Now he decides to go into politics. What's the changeover?
Well, I'll give you the very first political event that we went to. It was just me and Mr. Trump. We got out of the car and there was 400 people there. They were all in a large gymnasium.
I have tremendous relationships with many, many Mexicans, but the ones we're getting is like a little tough situation.
Then I knew from that point on, and I said to him, I said, we're going to need help.
Show them how many people come to these rallies. Go ahead.
And it just grew and grew and grew to tens of thousands of people. So we knew in the very beginning, there's something here. The Secret Service came on board, which I will say were very professional and some of the best, probably the best protection people in the world at that time.
So let's talk about that. So there's this combination of private security, of local law enforcement, and then
right.
Secret Service.
Right.
So when we talk about the attempted assassination of Butler,
right.
in your expert opinion, why weren't there snipers on the high ground? Why weren't there all these things?
Well, first, as far as Butler, I can speak on. My opinion is Mr. Trump did not have the assets that he should have had that day for two reasons. One, the First Lady had an event at the same time, and the VP had an event at the same time. And Secret Service is spread very thin. So Mr. Trump, being not the favorite, I'm sure, of the Biden administration, they gave him the leftovers. In my opinion, Mr. Trump got the short end of the stick that day. The security detail that he had that was on him that day, they didn't have a full complement. One, because he's no longer the president, and two, they're not a fan of Mr. Trump.
Criminals. We have people that just on the roof.
The videos of the shooter getting onto the roof and the people. It is really remarkable, the fact that there are dozens and dozens of people at the rally saying spontaneously as they're being recorded is that, hey, there he is, I see him, look at him, he's rolling over. There's the guy, that's the guy with the gun. Hey, officer. They are screaming for this person only 140 yards away from where Trump is speaking. 9 minutes beforehand, the snipers are notified that they think the person of suspicion they've been looking for an hour, they should be on the alert for, and they still don't tell anyone.
Over an hour and a half before the rally started, one of the local snipers texts, kid learning around building we are in. I did see him with a rangefinder looking towards stage. FYI, if you want to notify SS snipers to look out, I lost sight of him.
And guess what? It gets worse than that. Because what would I like to see? What would you like to see? What would everybody in the public want to hear? We want to hear the communications that they were having that day in the Secret Service and the local police. And the Secret Service says, oh, we flushed those communications. We erased those communications. You mean to tell me that the former president of the United States was almost killed? You had one of the greatest breaches of security maybe in Secret Service history, and somebody didn't give the order 30 seconds after that happened, hold everything, destroy nothing? That's unbelievable.
Gerald Posner, thank you so much for being on the show today. You're an expert on all things assassination. You're the author of 13 acclaimed books. One of them, Case Closed, about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, was a finalist for the Pulitzer in history. So you're an expert on assassinations, and we have a lot of questions about that. Obviously, there's a lot of conspiracy theories going around about the attempted assassination of ex-president, maybe future president, Donald Trump. And, one of the things so we've been talking to sort of ballistics experts and snipers, and, people are saying, yeah, it's impossible that this happened, and sort of more tactical things. And we're like, okay, well, who would be responsible for this failure? And, the official line, and maybe I'll start with this, the official line is the Secret Service fell down. It was sort of gross ineptitude, that local law enforcement weren't up to the gig. There were communications problems, et cetera, et cetera. And the snipers that we're talking to are like, yeah, there's no way. You don't get close. You don't get 120, 150 yards away with an AR-15 walking around with a rangefinder. But I guess the big question is, they don't know who would be responsible for this. And you're sort of an expert on all these things, and I want to get into it. But my first question is, okay, it's if these snipers are right and there's some order given, who's giving those orders?
Yeah, no, I get it. And Shane, it's possible that when the facts emerge, and they haven't yet. So, I'm sort of a type of guy that says, hey, show me the information, and then I'll tell you what's going on. Then I'll draw a conclusion. So, the gross ineptitude, that's easy to see. It's the greatest dereliction of duty I've ever seen from studying a Secret Service presidential rally. I've never seen anything like it. So the question is, do we jump then from it either has to be gross negligence, these are the incompetent Keystone cops, or it's really the deep state and a secret order given to go ahead and kill Trump? Or is there also some possible middle ground where we find out eventually that people in the Secret Service who really did not like Trump may have slowed the security up, let it and allowed it to be lax, repeated, we now know for a 2-year period, refused to give the Trump campaign all the security they wanted. They first denied that, and then they admitted a day later. So is it possible that they made it so lax that a 20-year-old disgruntled shooter who wants to put himself in the history books could take an AR-15 140 yards away from the stage and get a shot off at the president? That's possible as well. So, there's what I call a conspiracy that's a small conspiracy, a conspiracy of silence, and then the grand conspiracy we've all seen when we've watched JFK and we see Mr. X, which is somebody inside the government directing so-and-so to go ahead and do it.
So you kind of are an expert on this stuff with your research into not only JFK, but the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination. What are some of the similarities that you can draw between those and this assassination attempt?
There are a few similarities. One is that the greatest sort of speculation immediately about a conspiracy and the doubts that we have comes only when there is a rifle shot from a distance. Now, that's only happened 3 times in modern history. It's JFK, John Kennedy was a rifle shot from a distance, Martin Luther King, and then now with the Trump shooting. At least when somebody is shot at close range with a pistol, they come in like Sirhan did on Bobby Kennedy, or Chapman on John Lennon, or Hinckley on Reagan. You know who the shooter is. You don't know if it's a conspiracy, but you know at least who was pulling the trigger. With a rifle shot, you're not sure right away. So I think that's part of it. The other thing is, what's the comparison to the Kennedy case and to the King case? The government repeats here the same mistakes that it made in the past, which is separate from the shooting sequence itself. Instead of being transparent, they started off by hiding things, by not disclosing it, by withholding information, and by trying to point the fingers at others. So you have the Secret Service initially saying, oh, by the way, it's not us, it's the local cops. They were responsible for all the security outside the perimeter. That's such BS. The Secret Service is responsible for the entire day. Oh, by the way, I don't know if we have a drone or not to fly above a rally site to see if it's secure or not. Meanwhile, the shooter has his own drone that he's able to fly 3 times over the site. So there's all types of things here that ring wrong. And I think that they never learned their lesson, they meaning the government. The government on the Kennedy assassination had an official panel get together, the Warren Commission, that came out a year later and said Lee Harvey Oswald killed the president alone. Americans don't believe blue ribbon panels that do their work largely in secret. Even if they come to the right conclusion, they're not going to believe it. We had trouble with the 9/11 Commission report after 9/11 because they gave a free pass to the Saudis. I wrote a book about that. So government blue ribbon panels don't work. Hiding information doesn't work. And we also know from the Kennedy assassination that the government also gets involved in conspiracies against the public interest, and then they try to hide those. So the CIA was trying in the 60s to kill a head of state, Fidel Castro, together with the mafia. They failed to do that, and they hid that information from the Warren Commission. They lied to the Warren Commission about it. The FBI lied to the Warren Commission about it. In the Martin Luther King assassination, we found out years later that the FBI withheld the fact that they were illegally spying on Martin Luther King with all types of surveillance. So no wonder people don't have faith in their own government. No wonder they think there's a secret element of the government that's doing all types of nefarious things. Sometimes they are doing nefarious things, but not all the time.
We're still waiting on the Secret Service report and the FBI report. What do you think comes out in these reports?
Out of these reports, we will not get the answers to say, that's it, let's wrap it up. We can stop talking about this. We're going to wonder why they took so long, whenever it is, whether it's a month from now or 3 months from now, to get the information out. If Trump is elected in November, they're going to be in a very uncomfortable situation, having the person who was almost killed, the target of the assassination, on top of them with his administration saying, I want it all. And then they'll really be pressed. But we're not going to get what we want, which is real transparency, full information, and more than just, I'm sorry, I screwed up and we'll do better next time. That's not good enough.
So you don't think we're ever going to get to the truth on this? You think it's just going to stay a cover up unless Trump gets in and says, hey, you guys tried to shoot at me. What the hell happened?
Yeah, I think if Trump gets in, there's a much better chance. We've never been, that's a situation we've never seen in American history, in which the target of an almost successful assassination is running for the presidency and then becomes the president and then shakes the sort of, secret state upside down, the deep government upside down, and watches it all fall out. Because I do think that is a possibility here, and it would be fantastic as a journalist, as an investigative journalist, to follow that. It's a hell of a time to do reporting because you're going to get some fighting taking place behind the scenes.
What do you think comes out when they finally release, or people like yourself finally are successful with FOIAing JFK and Martin Luther King Jr. assassinations? What do you think the final reveals will be?
Never say never, because you don't know until you see it, but there's no bad choice of words, no smoking gun document, I think, sitting inside the Kennedy files. And the reason I say that with some confidence, I've seen the type of material that they've been fighting to keep secret for the last few years, which involves some names and assets of intelligence operations. Get a load of this, Shane. This is just, the public doesn't realize this. The CIA is arguing that they have some names, sources, and locations of operations and agents from 60 years ago that they would like to keep secret. And let me tell you, if our enemies, Russia, China, everybody else, they know every one of those names in there. After 60 years, if our enemies don't know that information, they're doing a worse job than we are. So holding on to it is absolutely crazy. But the reason I say that there will not be a explosive document that will change everybody's view of the assassination, let's assume for a second that it was a deep state conspiracy on Kennedy, which I don't think, but let's say it was. So you have a deep state conspiracy on Kennedy, and they've pulled off in essence, a perfect crime in Dallas. They fooled people like me into thinking that Oswald was the shooter. They've somehow mastered all of this, and then they've made only one mistake on this otherwise perfect crime. Somebody in the secret state sent over a document to the National Archives. Remember, these documents are at the National Archives, that exposes the entire thing. And they said to themselves, oh my God, we sent over the key document that exposes how we killed Kennedy. It's in the National Archives. And what do? They don't go and steal it back. They don't destroy it. They allow it to go through the process where eventually it will be disclosed to all of us. Not going to happen. If there was such a document, it would have been destroyed long ago. If there were materials that showed that there was a grand conspiracy to kill Kennedy, it would never have landed in the National Archives in the first place. So what I call is you have to put on your common sense hat sometimes.
Right.
Doesn't mean that you can't look for a conspiracy. You can't say, I'm trying to find one, but you're not going to find it in what I call the documents provided by the National Archives, which were made available in this big turnover by the agencies to them in the last few decades. By the way, as a sidelight, I often think I'm probably the only person from my 1975 graduating class at Berkeley. If you had told me in 1975 that one day I would think Lee Harvey Oswald shot the president alone, I would have thought you were certifiably insane. And you go off and you investigate a case to find out, you let the evidence take you where it will, but clearly, and you get this so well, and you're a news guy, you want to find the biggest story you can.
Sure.
The biggest story is to come back with the big conspiracy story that convinces everybody, the news anchors and the New York Times and the Washington Post. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
To come back after, I did my book 30 years after the assassination, to come back and say, hey, by the way, I've got new evidence and new forensics and blah, blah, blah. But the answer is that Oswald did it. And you go, yeah, really? That's all? You want more? And I understand that. The conspiracies are much more satisfying.
Yeah. To go back to your earlier point, the truth of the government being the Keystone Cops who fall down, and just some kid can come with a gun and throw it all into disarray, not a good one. We'd rather believe in the CIA actually works, or the FBI knows stuff, or right. These things happen, or like Kennedy wants to get out of Vietnam, so we get rid of him.
And they do. And by the way, they do, and the government does conspire against our best interests. We know that. There's Iran-Contra, there's Watergate. There are all types of instances we can look at. There's the misinformation about Iraq that gets us into this major war. So yes, conspiracies exist. The government at times does conspire against the best interests of the public. And then eventually we find out about it, sometimes years later, but not every time is a conspiracy like that. But they definitely are. There are real ones.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about Snowden the other day, and they were saying, whistleblower. And I said, do you know what he was a whistleblower of? And they were like, no. And I said, well, he found information that the American government was illegally surveilling its people, using technology, which now everyone's just going, well, it's on your phone. What can you do? But it's literally the definition of a police state. I've talked to people in the Stasi, the German secret police, who they had 1 in 3 people in the population as informers. And they were like, if we had this level of information, we would be very happy, because they have all the information. They have every bit of information. And he broke that story to the American people about the government spying on you. And then, he's just a terrible guy. And you're like, well, he did this for you guys. I mean, he did this, he screwed his life up for you.
So there are two things on that. One, if you said to me 20 or 30 years ago, by the way, I'm going to develop a device that people will carry around with them because it's going to provide all types of entertainment and they can talk on that. And we will be able to use that to track where they are, what they did, everything about them. Will collect profiles fully. I would say you're crazy. No one will carry that device around. So what did I know? But the thing about Snowden as well, and I think of this often as a journalist, why do I think Daniel Ellsberg, who released the Pentagon Papers, helped to finally prove the extent to which the government was lying to us about Vietnam, is heroic? And I think that Snowden was brave, but not necessarily heroic. And that's because Ellsberg went to the New York Times. Yeah. You don't have to go to the New York Times to be heroic, but you need to go to Vice, or you need to go to ABC, or you need to go to the Washington Post. If you go to an outlet, if Snowden had gone to an outlet and said, by the way, here it all is, and it was then all disclosed, there would have been no espionage charges, or they would have tried to come after him, no question. But I think that was part of the problem, the difference, let's say, in how Ellsberg and Snowden were received over time.
Right. That's a good segue into the next question I wanted to ask. I studied political science as well, and political economy. And one of the things I was sort of blown away by when I first came to the States from Canada is, Clinton had taken the largest deficit. ever made it into the largest surplus, had reduced size of government, and then Bush gets in and then spends the surplus, makes it a deficit, and then increases the size of government. So basically, the two pillars of the Democratic and Republican Party switched, and no one said boo. And one of the things that, especially in foreign countries, is the sort of, America's a two-party system, so they're both in power at all times. You're either in power or you're the opposition. And it's a republic, electoral college, et cetera. It's not a democracy. It's just a two-party system with an electoral college. It's a republic. It was founded as a republic. And so a lot of the and now let's say the bull goose loony, electoral cycle this time is a perfect example of this. Is this not a bunch of bread and puppet theater so that people think that it's a democracy, so that they have agency, that this is they're a part of this thing, and and in actual fact, what you say, this deep state of the big military industrial complex, the career bureaucrats, the people who believe they're saving the great beast from themselves, like they're saving the people from themselves. Like, is it all sort of just a lot of much ado about nothing because do we believe we're living in this democracy?
Even if the deep bureaucratic state isn't calling all the shots, they definitely want to survive. Sure. Nobody creates a new department like Homeland Security or has the Department of Education grow over time, and then those departments say, you know what, you're right. We're not serving a good purpose anymore. We can close up and cut half the jobs in here. They all look to justify the reason that they exist. And the Democratic and Republican parties, there are some differences, and maybe today bigger differences than there were in the past, but they're very similar to each other. You're not, unless you're going to Bernie Sanders on the Democrats, you're going to somebody really on the far right on the Republicans, you're not getting that change of government. The real threat to the two-party system is an outside third party. I did a book years ago in a second presidential run on Ross Perot. And let me tell you, he scared the hell out of the two-party system because he had something that really scares them, not just public appeal, but he had money. You know that it's all about money in the U.S., and the system is corrupt with money, and the Supreme Court decision on Sullivan makes sure that it's corrupt on money. But if you're a billionaire, you're able to spend your own money unlimited, and that scares those parties. But otherwise, it's very, very close to having two slices of the same side continuing. And the bureaucracies know that for the most part, they get to survive under both. One last quick footnote for whatever it's worth. The Bush explosion from the 8 years of his presidency in terms of the deficit, if you take the war money out, so you take what I call the post 9/11 Afghanistan and Iraq money out, it's almost a balanced budget. Yeah. We go into this massive deficit because of the war. We're spending big times, and so the good news was during the Clinton years, very careful on the budget and no big war. But the minute you get into a war, you're throwing everything out, and arms manufacturers and Donald Douglas and everybody else, they love all of that because they know they get to the front of the line on the budget.
Yeah, I mean, I reported a lot in Iraq and Afghanistan. Afghanistan, you have at least a modicum of logic where, Al-Qaeda trained there. Although going there for 20 years, to war, we could have just paid them. Don't let Al-Qaeda, because, the history with that. But Iraq, and everybody knew it. I mean, they were Baathists. They were non-extremist, and they fought extremists. And to go into Iraq was made up, and weapons of mass destruction, et cetera, and it cost hundreds of thousands of lives, if not millions of lives. And we created the political vacuum for ISIS, right. and now it's basically Sunni, Shia, and then the Saudi sort of influence, and you're sitting there. It's three different countries all now at war, and we created that, and for nothing. And so if you don't, believe that, we don't have to call it the deep state, but the people who wanted to go and spend a lot of military ordnance succeeded.
And what was unbelievable, Rumsfeld, Bush, and everything else at that time, was the Saudis. I understand how nefarious and how they can have a foot in both camps and everything else. I wrote a book about the kingdom. So I get it. They were warning Bush. They were saying to him, don't do it. By the way, Saddam Hussein keeps a lid on the pressure cooker over there. He's better to have him in the Ba'athists than you are with fundamentalists. We know because Osama bin Laden was one of ours. He is a fundamentalist, and it's a problem. The Tony Blair, otherwise a great labor leader for long term in the UK, tarred forever by joining that effort to go into Iraq. And when you say 20 years in Afghanistan, nobody in the American administration who made the decision to go in there to clean out, the Taliban as it was at the time, would ever have imagined that it was a 20-year commitment, or that down the road we'd be now dealing with another Taliban government, which goes to show you how ineffective these major decisions are that not only affect trillions of dollars, but the loss of tens of thousands of lives, hundreds of thousands in terms of civilians as well. These decisions are made on the fly. And the people who make them that lead to this type of catastrophe are the ones, in my view, that really have to be held responsible for history, because they have done things that, to me, are as bad as anything I know in modern American history.
No, I agree. One last question. You brought up Ross Perot, which is very interesting, and I agree with you, and also that he had the money. People forget that Trump has historical ties to the Democratic Party, and his family, for example, Gerald was close to the Clintons. He portrays himself as sort of a Ross Perot-ian sort of, outsider and clean the swamp and all this business. But, isn't this the ultimate sort of insiderism? Like they're close to the Democrats and to the Republicans. I mean, he writes Republican policy. He runs the GOP now.
Yeah, I mean, he said GOP is essentially, a Trump operation. That's right. The families took over the RNC. And at one point he said, I think in 2016, and I'm paraphrasing here, so I'm sure somebody will hold me, that's not exactly accurate. But he said, I was one of these insiders. I know how it works. Right. I know how the parties, when he was trying to show that he could clean it up, he was saying, I was one of those who had people on both sides of the parties. Perot was completely different. Perot did make a lot of money from government contracts and his electronic data systems, but then he was the outsider. And Perot was talking all the time, for those who don't remember or weren't born at the time, about the fact that we were spending too much money. They were robbing the Social Security balance to be able to feed other government programs, and we were running a deficit. Today, Perot, if he were still alive, looking at a multi-trillion-dollar deficit, would be in a coma, or that he'd be so crazy. Right. Whereas Trump ran up one of the biggest deficits ever, some of it under COVID, I understand that, as a Republican president right before Biden then continued running it up. So now we have both parties essentially writing the checks all the time, worrying about it down the road, what the consequences will be. You talked before about how similar the parties are, and they are similar in that sense as well. But I agree with you that Trump, although he seems very much the outsider because he speaks in a way that isn't usual for politicians, was the insider. He's quite different than a real third-party candidate, a real type of Perot or somebody else.
I want to go back to this deep state thing because it's super, and you explained it really well. What is the deep state?
I could tell you, but I'd have to call Langley first to make sure that they let me tell you. No, I'm only kidding. The deep state is a combination of intelligence, CIA, NSA, Homeland Security, FBI, working together with the military, together with top industrialists, to sort of decide what is being done in the real world. So we elect a new president every 4 years or every 8 years. That president really is just a figurehead of sorts, because the deep state is making the decisions about whether we invade Iraq, whether we go to war, are we backing this side over that side in a given thing. And the U.S. is essentially in a permanent state of conflict or war, because that's what makes the most money. That's the deep state. And there is a reaction from what I call the center and right of the political spectrum that is immediately, and I get a lot of emails and direct messages from people on this, who say, I think the deep state was involved in this because this was an attempt to kill Trump. That's what they believe.
So basically, it's career bureaucrats who sort of are entrenched in the mechanisms of intelligence power and the traditional, what we used to call, when I was growing up, the military-industrial complex, where you have this, the people who are contracting the munitions and then working with intelligence. That makes sense. That's a sort of a believable thing. Like these people, it's billions, if not trillions of dollars. All these people work together for long periods of time. They get together, they figure stuff out. Now, what's weird would be, okay, we're going to collude to kill a presidential candidate. Why? And also, you'd think that Trump would be the poster child for these people because, he's pro-business, anti-tax. So you'd think that these guys would love him.
I get it. And although I don't think the deep state was behind the Trump shooting, I'll tell you why. I understand why somebody could believe that and why Trump, you said. Because Trump, although he's pro-business and everything else, is also somebody that can't be controlled.
Here's my plan to dismantle the deep state and reclaim our democracy from Washington corruption.
So the deep state wants a president that they think they can push the strings for. They can say, here's what you have to do. And if you don't, it's going to be all types of trouble for you. So some people would say, oh, that was probably a warning shot to Trump. That was to tell him if he doesn't play, by the rules if he becomes president again, next time the bullet won't just hit the ear. But I think that the problem with the deep state and Trump is that he often talks about them.
We will establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to declassify and publish all documents on deep state spying, censorship, and corruption.
He has made them a target. He said, I want to go after the deep state. He doesn't trust them. He thinks that they were the ones who were spinning all types of things about the Russian dossier and that. So as far as the deep state would be concerned, Trump is not only unreliable, he can't be controlled, but he's a danger because he could become a president that really turns the spotlight on them, and that's something they would not want.
Now, the more I talk to people, the more questions I have, and we're not done investigating the deep state. So in the next episode, we do a deep dive on the deep state with experts like author Gerald Posner and the guy who literally wrote the original book about it, Peter Dale Scott. And they give us their perspective on the deep state, who they are, and why politicians who cross them may be in grave danger, or not. But we get into it on the next episode of Shane Smith Has Questions.